But the Assange matter, what's your assessment?
Oh, I think the important...
Welcome home.
Well, I can understand why the family is very pleased to have him home, of course. But the important thing here is that the justice system of the UK and the US be respected. Assange, of course, pleaded guilty, and we welcome the fact that that has resulted in his release. But all the way along, this hasn't been about illegal detention. This has actually been about the justice system of other countries we respect, who are like-minded countries, and that should be our starting point as we approach this.
Not like Kylie Moore-Gilbert in
Well, very
Iran.
different from Sheng Lei or Kylie Moore-Gilbert and others. They were illegal detentions. And that means the government should have a very different approach to those situations. It's not the role for the government to celebrate an outcome like this. It's certainly the role for the family. I can understand that. But the government has got to recognise that this was not a legal detention, and the UK and US justice systems have actually been... They've had to operate through their own processes, and that's appropriate.
There are really different... I'm sure you've heard this from your own constituents, but those that care about it, there are different views. There's those that almost beatify Julian Assange as a great hero and saint of free speech. There are others who, as Michael Ware just said on our program, thinks he betrayed the national interest. In fact, Stephen Smith said in 2010 it was a great risk and threat to our national interests.
Well, he's pleaded guilty to espionage. It's important to recognise that. And so the point here is that those justice systems are justice systems we respect. They've played their way through. We welcome the fact that the outcome was what it was. And I realise this really divides the community, but I think it's time to focus on other issues. Yeah. And the most important of those issues, Kieran, is that Australians are facing a cost of living crisis with no end in sight.
With the inflation number, the argument was being made yesterday by some economists and commentators that the number that dropped off from May 2023 was even worse than May 2024, but actually inflation hadn't grown in that month. What do you say to that?
This is Jim's spin.
But other commentators...
Well, except that the outcome was seen by the markets, who are pretty objective evaluators of all of this, as a complete disaster. We have seen, since that inflation announcement come out, the markets and many leading economists say we're looking down the barrel now of 12 months without an interest rate cut and a very real prospect of higher interest rates. What's unambiguous is we're in a situation... Well, I'm just saying I don't get into forecasting, Kieran, but what I do say, the markets are unambiguous. I mean, they are in absolute shock on this number. So it could be spun by some however they like it, but you can't spin this one. Australians are looking down the barrel now of a situation where interest rates are going to be higher for longer.
What's driving the stickiness?
Well,
on the inflation side?
The history of inflation all around the world throughout history has been very simple. If you leave all the work to the Reserve Bank, then either you completely wreck the economy or you don't beat inflation. The government has to do its bit. And we've got a government here who has been reckless in 3 failed budgets. It hasn't done what needed to be done. We've got 16% growth in spending in the next 2 years in this budget, driving the budget off a cliff. It's a big spending budget.
But the state's also shoveling out
they're doing their bit too.
dollars right now.
And I don't see Jim Chalmers trying to rein them in at all. I mean, this is a treasurer who doesn't understand inflation. He doesn't get it. And Australians do, because Australians are suffering from it. And they're not just suffering from the inflation, they're suffering from the higher interest rates, the higher taxes they're paying, and nothing the government can do will touch the size.
Do you fear we might get a couple of rate hikes?
Look, the market is seeing real prospects of rate increases and no prospect of rate reductions in the next 12 months. I'm not going to get into forecasting. You've already tried me on that, Kieran, and I'm not going to do it. But what I'm going to say is that the view of leading economists and the bond markets that obviously assess this and set the interest rates that we all pay is that there's no end in sight and hope is running out. Australians have cracked open the piggy bank. They're working harder than ever. Yeah. They're cutting back on spending, and none of that has been enough. And I tell you, there's no light at the end of this tunnel.
I just wonder, in hindsight, you know, this is a hypothetical, but I think it's relevant because if there are a couple of rate hikes, the coalition would be right in the game ahead of the next election. Should you maybe have held off on such an ambitious nuclear policy, which again could be so decisive? You could lose a lot of votes on that front. You could win it just on cost of living and rates if another 2 or 3 hikes are seen.
Yeah, well, I'll leave the political commentary to you. That may well be right. But the point is we've got to do what's right for the nation. And this is a time, Kieran, where hard decisions need to be made. We don't need weakness in our leadership, as we're seeing from the Prime Minister and the Treasurer. And whether it's beating inflation by taking the right policies into a budget, 3 failed budgets that haven't actually done what needed to be done, or whether it's failing to actually deal with the short-term and longer-term issues in our energy system, which is failing us. Just look at the electricity and gas price over the last month. I mean, it's been diabolical. This government has not made the right calls, and we're paying a very high price for it. Every single Australian right now is paying a high price, and those with a mortgage seriously cannot see light at the end of the tunnel now, and that's because of this government's failures.
Angus Taylor, thanks for your time.